tonight, as we cover Matthew chapter 9, this is one of my very favorite chapters in the Bible, and it's one of my very favorite passages are in this chapter. I just love the simplicity that comes alongside it. In this chapter, we get to see Jesus do more miracles, just like he did in chapter 8. And he's doing these miracles for a very specific reason, maybe even for a few specific reasons, and maybe even for reasons that we talked about last week. We opened up and we were brainstorming why Jesus does miracles. And I gave you a few reasons. Does anybody remember what one of those reasons was? Yes, because he loves us or has compassion for us. That's good. Ethan. That's right. He needed to show them his credentials for being the Messiah. Anybody remember the last one? That's exactly right. He had compassion for his people. They, the miracles, provided credentials to his claim as the Messiah of Israel, because we know that as he did miracles, he was fulfilling Old Testament prophecies, and his ultimate concern was that he shared saving truth with the people of the Jews specifically. So, does anybody remember what we decided these miracles were? As he did these miracles, he was achieving something. I think we called it something in action. What did Jesus maybe do right before chapter 8? Okay, that's good. So when he went and did these miracles, what was he doing? Yeah, we called it the sermons in action, right? Jesus was taking what he taught his people. Remember, the Sermon on the Mount is not a sermon that would get a lot of people to come be Christians. Instead, it was a sermon about what it looked like for you to be a Christian. So you have accepted Christ, you've repented of your sin, now you're a Christian, this is what you're supposed to look like. Now Jesus is taking that plan and he's putting those things into action. The last thing that I need help with, because chapter 8 and chapter 9 are connected, is I want to recap chapter 8 as we go into chapter 9 tonight. So, last week, what were our two big takeaways? One of them, yep.
Jesus gives grace to the outcast.
Jesus gives grace to the outcast. What does that mean? What did it mean for Jesus to give grace to the outcast? Yeah, Maya.
Like when the leprosy, or when the one guy that had leprosy, like went up to him, like he was an outcast.
Yeah.
So he's being gracious towards him by healing him.
That's great. What was another one that we talked about? Another miracle that he did? Yeah, Daniel.
He offered peace to the disturbed.
Yep, he sure did. Okay, what was the second big takeaway? We know Jesus gives grace to the outcast. Stevie? Jesus offers peace to the disturbed. What did that mean? What did that look like? What did we look at? Yeah, Lucy.
He calmed the storm.
He calmed the storm. Talia?
He cast out the demons.
He sure did cast out the demons. Stevie? Good job. Okay, so we know that Jesus gives grace to the outcast. He offers peace to the disturbed. And we see Jesus doing miracles that prove those things to us. So what we want to do now is read Matthew 9. Do I have a couple people who want to read for me? Yeah, Ethan, I'm going to let you start. And then whenever you want to be done, Julia can step in. Julia, whenever you want to be done, Talia, you can finish up. And if there's more after that, I can read, okay? Great job, guys. Who read Matthew 9 this week? Okay. Very few of you, which is fine. I would really encourage you this upcoming week to read Matthew 10, which is where we'll find ourselves next week. There's so many verses. This was 38 verses. Matthew 10 is even longer than Matthew 9. So I would really encourage you, read it. Even if you just read it one time, you'll at least be a little bit more prepared for Sunday night, because we, just to be transparent, have to move through it really quickly. So tonight, we actually start our walkthrough of chapter 9 in the exact same way that we start or ended chapter 8. We're still talking about Jesus offering peace to those who are disturbed. So that is not a mistake. It is the exact same point once again. We know that thus far, Jesus has proven himself to be powerful over sickness. He's proven himself to be powerful over storms. And now we're finding out that he's also powerful over sin. So Jesus provides peace for sinners. The man that we interact here in the very beginning is in bed and he is paralyzed. He cannot walk and he needs help with everything. And the good news is that Matthew tells us he has 4 friends that have love for him, have hope for what could be for him, and have faith that he would be healed. And those are important attributes that they have. They didn't let anything get between them and Jesus for their friend. They wanted to see him healed, and they had faith that Christ was capable of doing that healing. And in this, I think it's very specific that we see this laid out, because I think that Matthew is saying we need to have that same sort of faith, right? Look, to be transparent, even as we work through the master planning meetings, right? And we first look at building an addition on the back of the gym, and we look at what if we built a second story on top of the lobby and that's where the teens go, or what if we reposition how rooms work downstairs? What if we come out here and even if we redo this, we have this big price tag, right? And that price tag is scary. That's a lot of money that we have to raise. One of the main things that we say through all of those things, it's a little different than somebody needing healed physically, but we just have to have faith that if this is what the Lord has for us, then money will come in and we'll build. And we'll have a space out here. And if it doesn't, guess what? We're out here right now. And we'll find a space inside. And so no matter what, we meet and we get to study God's Word. So we have to have this faith. That's what Matthew is saying. And the biggest point of this story is not Jesus allowing the man to walk again, because we know that he does that, but Jesus healing his spiritual paralysis before his physical paralysis, right? We see that that's how he does it. It's not until verse 7 of these 8 verses that this man actually gets up and walks with his legs. Before that, all Jesus is doing is dealing with his spiritual life. And we can take notice that we talked last week some about the personality of Jesus. Right, we talked about how when you read the Gospels, especially if you can read, if you sit down and read the book of Matthew from beginning to end in one setting, right? If you take an hour, 2 hours, book of Mark is a little bit shorter. Just sit down and read it. You get a really clear picture of who Jesus is, his personality, the way that he holds himself, and things along those lines. And I feel like we get to see some of his personality even in this. As it says, the scribes were saying to one another. I just picture them being 50 feet away. And they're talking about how this guy's blaspheming. And then it says that Jesus just hears their thoughts and just responds to them. And I just think about how it just makes me think it seems funny to me. It feels like probably that row specifically of boys finds themselves pretty often. Yeah, you, Ethan. Yeah, you guys. Find yourselves at one another's house, or some of you are in school, and you're all laughing, and then one of your moms comes and pokes their head around they're like, I heard that, be quiet. That probably happens to you a lot. That's what it feels like Jesus is doing right here, is he's really far away, but he used his mom ears or his teacher ears, And he just responds to them just because he could hear their thoughts. And the way that he looks at the Pharisees, and he kind of, it seems like he picks them apart, right? It says in verse 4, Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, "Why do you think evil in your hearts? For which is easier to say your sins are forgiven, or to say rise and walk? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." And then he said to the paralytic, "Rise, pick up your bed, and go home," right? It was easy for Jesus. It didn't take a lot of effort for Jesus to go and do these things. He says, of course I can heal his legs. Of course I can help him walk. But more importantly than allowing him to stand up off this bed and leave, I have power over sin. I am the Son of Man, and I have power on earth to forgive people of their sins. It is after salvation comes, after that we have forgiveness, that we get to see physical healing come. And it's important to note on this story that not all physical ailments are due to sin issues, and that not all forgiveness of sin will lead to the healing of physical ailments, right? That both of those things happen here in this story, but they are not always linked. There are going to be people that have physical ailments that even after they've come to have salvation in the Lord, they're still going to experience those ailments. There are going to be people that, that their ailments are not a result of the sin that they have committed. So, Jesus provides peace for the sinners. Next, these are my favorite verses, okay, is a second discipleship interlude. Somebody tell me about Matthew. Who is Matthew? Okay, what does that mean? Okay, great. Why is that like nuts? Clay. Okay, he's a traitor to the Jewish culture. Do you know why? Like, can you articulate that? JT. He works for the Romans. Okay?
People don't like him because he takes more money than he needs.
He sure does. So tell me about tax collectors. What's their job?
Well, their job is to collect the taxes.
Yeah.
But a lot of times they would collect more taxes than the Romans actually wanted them to.
That's exactly right.
Take the extras and spend it.
Right, so they basically sign contracts, right? They are, in this case, Matthew is a Jewish man, and he goes to Rome. He goes to, the government and says, "How much taxes do I need to collect for you this year, say?" Okay, and they give him a number. And then he knows that every dollar, gold piece, silver piece, whatever it be, that is over that number on that contract, he just gets to put in his pocket and take home with him. And so the Jews see Rome as their enemies. And then they see this Jewish man, Matthew, going to Jews on behalf of Rome, taking their money away and becoming rich off of that money. And so Matthew is seen as an enemy, right? He's hated by the Jews. He is working for the people who are taking from them. And Matthew, his name actually at this point is Levi, okay? He receives the name Matthew, which means gift of God, after his conversion. And so there's this kind of like this beautiful truth in the Gospel of Matthew that we never actually hear Matthew utter any words. Like, he doesn't record himself saying anything at all. Even in this instance, right? In Matthew 9, verse 9, it says, "As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at a tax booth." Right? It didn't say Matthew saw him. All along the line so far, we've seen people come to Jesus and say, I'm paralyzed, I have a fever, I need help, right? And he has helped them. But here Jesus sees Matthew, and he calls to Matthew, and he says to him, "Follow me." Matthew, it says in verse 9, rose and followed him. And the reason that this passage feels so meaningful to me And really it extends into 13. Maybe I'll just read 10, 11, 12, and 13. And as Jesus reclined at the table in the house, behold, this is Matthew's house. Many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with the tax collectors and sinners? But when he heard it, Jesus again, teacher ears, mom ears, says, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. And the reason that I just love this story so much is I love the simplicity, right? We've talked about how Jesus is already showing, like, his personality also is divine, right? He just knows things that he's not supposed to know. He knows exactly the words to say to disarm people or to debate people and kind of shut down their arguments. But in this moment, he sees Matthew, right, who I would say is an outcast, is not somebody that brings peace to his community. And he sees Matthew, and he just looks at Matthew and just says, follow me. And it's the perfect two words to get a person who everybody hates to just stand and to give away his life, right? What happens here is Matthew opens his heart and he becomes a new person. And it doesn't just stop there. Jesus' choice of Matthew, not only did Jesus know Matthew's heart to know that he would get up and rise, but he also knew Matthew enough to know that what happens when he asks Matthew or tells Matthew, follow me, is what he gains is access to a group of people he doesn't have access to. Because it tells us that they go back to Matthew's house and they're sitting at a table, and who's at the table with them? It's not like all of his disciples and apostles, it's tax collectors and sinners. It's outcasts that we've been talking about all the way through Matthew 8 so far. And so he now is sitting in a spot where he's making outcasts have community. He's bringing them together so that they can focus on him specifically. And I just think that that is like a beautiful story of simplicity when it comes to Christ, of picking so strategically and so honestly this man that allows him to have access to a group of people he doesn't have access to. And I just think that that's really sweet. Verse 14 through 17, still part of this discipleship interlude. The disciples of John came to him saying, why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not? And Jesus said to them, can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come and the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast. No one puts a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch tears away from the garment, and a worse tear is made. Neither is new wine put into old wineskins. If it is, the skins burst and the wine is spilled and the skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved. So I'm going to just really briefly tell you what this means, but I'm not going to give you a lot of detail because I really think it's important, especially because we're covering so much in such a short period of time, for you to go home and do some of this study on your own. So, in this short passage, now this is just 14 through 17, we see Matthew talking about fasting. We get 4 pictures of Jesus' ministry, okay? These aren't going to be on here, but I want you to write them down, and I want you to go home, and I want you to research what this might mean, okay? We see that he is the physician. He came to bring spiritual health to sick sinners. That comes from really 13 and 14. 12 and 13 as well. He's a physician. He is the bridegroom. He came to give spiritual joy. So if you're writing them down, it is physician. It is bridegroom. We also learn that he is like the cloth. Okay, he didn't come to just patch things, but he came to make us whole. And then 4, he is like new wineskins, spiritually full. Physician, bridegroom, cloth, and wineskin. Go home and look up what those might mean for him. All this goes on to communicate that Jesus didn't come with desire to renovate, right? He didn't come to build on top, but instead he came with new life, and he offered that new life to anyone who comes before him and repents. So there's a little hint for you. If you're doing research, all of this points to how Jesus promises us new life. So that's 1 through 17. Number 2 is that Jesus brings restoration to the broken. Verses 18 through 38. Man, I know it's not likely, because you guys aren't studying it as intensely as I am as I write the lessons. But man, I would just so encourage you to read the chapters as wholes. Read Matthew 5 through 7, the whole Sermon on the Mount. Read 8 and 9 together because they're connected, right? They're supposed to be written together. Because when you read Matthew 9 from beginning to end, this story even is just so exciting about this man is a man named Jairus who comes to Jesus, and it's just really exciting. So this is Jesus restores a broken home in verses 18 and 19, and then they're kind of on a walk, and it breaks, and we'll get to that, and then they finally get to the home, okay? So I'm going to read it with that break in it. It says, while he was saying these things to him, behold, a ruler, this is Jairus, came in and knelt before him, saying, my daughter just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live. And Jesus rose and followed him and his disciples. I love that again. He does the same thing that Matthew did for him. He rises and he follows Jairus. And then we go back down to 23, and it says, and when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand. And then the girl arose, and the report of this went through all that district. And so we have this man named Jairus, who was a Jew and a leader in the synagogue, okay? Why is that important that I point that out, do you think? That he's Jewish and important in the synagogue? Yeah. Okay. It's not a super trick question. You're allowed to just guess, too. Why is it important that he's a leader in the synagogue and a Jew? Why does that make it important? Yeah, Talia. Yeah. He has no business going to Jesus, but does anyways, and probably does as the other his peers, right? The people that he works with, the people that are his community are probably looking at him with disgust, with awe and shock in a bad way about Jairus going before Jesus, and that means that it probably was desperately difficult for this man to decide to go before Jesus, and it was met with so much opposition, but his love for his daughter compels him to go ahead and take the risk and come before Jesus. And what's shocking is that when Jairus comes to Jesus, his daughter is actually at this point just almost dead. And we know this because of other gospel accounts, right? She's not actually quite dead yet when Jairus comes before him. And what happens is Jesus gets up and starts walking, but what happens on the way? In 20 to 22 maybe. Yeah. His garment, right? Right. So there's this little delay that happens as Jesus is going to Jairus' daughter. And what happens is just even that slight delay means that enough time passes that when Jesus gets to Jairus' house, his daughter she's been I can't find the word, declared dead. Right? And when it talks about the flute players and the people gathering around her, what's happening is ceremonies are already happening because this little girl has passed away. And Jesus does this thing, and it feels like to me, when he says, go away for the girl is not dead, but sleeping, like it feels so peaceful and calm to me. It doesn't feel like Jesus is mad in this moment at these people, right? Instead, he says in calm words, he reassures Jairus that she is not too far gone for Christ. And this pause, you can imagine it probably when he stops to heal this woman, like terrifies Jairus. Because his daughter, her life is on the line. But what we know and what we could have told Jairus now that we have the whole story is that the life matters to Christ more than it could ever matter to us. And so if he takes the time to stop and to interact with this woman and heal her as well, then he knows that there's time. Right? His daughter will never be too far gone. He's not going to jeopardize his daughter's health. And so Jesus he walks in, and all it takes is a few words, and all these people leave. I love that point too. That like he has everybody exits. And like there's something so gentle about, I just feel like it's Jairus and Jesus and his daughter, and he goes up and he just grabs her hand. And once he takes her hand, he breathes life into her again. And she rises. Again, arise. Right? Now Matthew followed, Jesus followed. Now this girl has risen as well. And it's this picture of this all-encompassing renewal that comes with salvation. Everything here is a story about what salvation does to us. Salvation heals our spiritual life. It heals our emotional life. It heals our physical life as well. It touches every facet of who we are. And in this moment, he heals Jairus' daughter, sorry. In Mark, he tells us this woman who touches Jesus' garment has visited 12 physicians, and she's received no help. Right? I think we all know somebody who is in a situation similar to this, right? Everybody here has a mom, a dad, a grandparent, a friend's parent. We all know somebody who has something, right? Maybe it's an ache, a pain, something that they go to doctors for years and years and years. And every time they go to the doctor, what the doctor says is, we don't know. We just can't quite figure out what's going on, right? And we know that she's been doing this for so many years. And so you can empathize with the despair and discouragement that comes with just not being able to figure out what is happening. That's causing you to experience, or causing someone to experience this. And because she's bleeding, that means that she's ceremonially unclean. Which means not only is she a woman, and we talked about last week that just even being a woman at this point means that you're an outcast, right? And so she's a woman and she's ceremonially unclean, which means, she is almost to be ignored, doesn't exist, isn't important. And so everything is stacked against her. And I don't think it's accidental that she's in the middle of the story about Jairus trying to heal his son with Jesus. We are looking at two people that are on completely opposite sides of life, right? One is a Jewish religious leader, high status, and he's a ruler, it says, and one is a ceremonially unclean woman who's been bleeding for 12 years and can't find help. And both of them meet together at the feet of Jesus. Jesus is the linchpin to bringing them together. Her faith, it kind of surprises me as I read verse 19. Because her faith almost seems, she says, if I only touch his garment, I will be made well. It feels superstitious to me. Right? That's not necessarily how we know that it's not just because Jesus is wearing clothes. If I touch his clothes, he heals me. but like her faith feels superstitious and sort of strange and off-center. And I find it like fascinating that even though she believes like differently than we would encourage somebody to believe, and even though she isn't necessarily holding Jesus in the same respect and regard that we find ourselves holding him in, she was holding him in high regard. And Jesus honors that. And Jesus heals her. And I just think that's important for us. Like in Columbus, Ohio, at Memorial Baptist Church, to recognize that there are people, right, even like this is maybe really timely because we just had this mission trip meeting, right? As we go into different cultures, as we kind of step out of what we're used to, what is easy for us, people are going to believe differently than us. They're going to see Christ and interact with him, have relationships differently than we do. And we see here that even though this woman, like, if we're being honest, if she came to our church and wanted to become a member and sat in a deacon interview and like talked in a superstitious fashion like that, we would all be like, okay, you didn't like quite say the words we were hoping for, right? It didn't point us in the exact same direction that we understand and we're comfortable with, but Christ honored that and healed her anyways. And I just think that is kind of like a neat little interlude in there. So we see that Jesus restores our broken bodies. We also see that there are a couple more miracles here about our broken bodies. Nobody is sure why, but broken bodies in verses 27 through 34. We don't exactly know why, but vision and blindness in the Gospels in the East, for some reason, is so important. We see Jesus heal like no less than 6 people from blindness. It is like the most common ailment that he comes and heals. And that has to be important. And probably the reason why is that blindness is a picture of spiritual ignorance and disbelief, right? We can't like necessarily pinpoint why here in this region it was so prevalent, but we do know spiritually it's pointing towards unbelief. And the sinner must be reborn before they can see the things of God. So by Jesus healing their blindness, he opens their eyes. And in this moment, Jesus does just that. He honors persistence and he honors faith as these men go as far as following him into a home. When they say, "Yes, Lord," it was enough for him to give them healing and restore their sight, right? A yes, Lord. And we have now seen that several times. Matthew gives a yes, Lord. Jairus gives a yes, Lord. This woman in the garment gives a yes, Lord, right? This is happening over and over and over again. And we also see a man who is mute and possessed by a demon. Or some of your translations may say oppressed by a demon. And that is an exciting study to do on the difference between being upset or possessed and oppressed by demonic presences, because they are different. But we know he is mute, he's possessed by a demon, and we're learning that there's a difference between sickness and demonic oppression or possession. This man is not naturally mute, but he is possessed by a demon, and that demon is physically afflicting his body. And that physical affliction is that he takes away his voice. He cannot speak. And what we see is that he comes and he heals this man. Of course he does. And we see the crowds marveling, saying, "Never was anything like this seen in Israel." And the Pharisees say, "He casts out demons by the prince of demons." And I think, again, just read Matthew 9 altogether with Matthew 8. Because this, if you read it together, I feel like you get because it almost feels silly for me to just say it right now, the point I'm about to make. But when you read it together, it feels so important. Like the human part of my heart, when the Pharisees accused Jesus of being able to cast out demons because he's using the power of Satan to cast them out, I feel angry. Right? Because I know that's not what Christ is doing. And it feels like I wish that this was like one of those moments where Jesus does like the get behind me, Satan, or like a little table flip, or maybe like when he looks at the Pharisees sometimes and like almost says, you don't know anything, this is what Scripture says. Like he just did that in 7, right? Like I want that to be what Jesus does in this moment. But he like doesn't. He's just kind of quiet. He doesn't say a word to anybody. Now the Pharisees will do this again in chapter 12 of Matthew. They'll accuse him of using the power of Satan to do miracles, cast out demons. And there, Jesus does a little refuting. So there's some redemption. The human part of my heart's like, oh, thank goodness. But here, I don't know. We just learn about Jesus. We get to see like this patience and this gentleness and like this calmness that exists in him. Along the journey to Jairus' daughter, he has the time to heal this woman. Right now, being accused of using the power of Satan, who cares? He just doesn't care that they would accuse him of that. It just doesn't matter to him because it doesn't matter. And I just think that like the calmness that exists in that, like I just don't have it. I'm not gentle like that. And so, I just wouldn't have responded that way. I just think it's just touching. And that's why I want you to read them as wholes, because there's just like, you don't get that. When I'm sitting here being like, man, Jesus is so gentle in this moment, and you're all kind of doing, it's like one of those nights where you're all like this, like staring at me. And so that's why I plead with you of like read 8 and 9 together, because you get to see that Jesus why doesn't he respond? He doesn't though. And so I just think that there's a lot of graciousness in that. And then we finish the chapter and we get this third discipleship interlude, this third time that Jesus takes a step away from the narrative of him doing these 10 miracles, and he gives us a lesson on discipleship. It's been a long time, so I'm going to read verses 35 through 38. They say, "And Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction." I think that is a shocking thing to say, because we know that like the Gospels are not biographical. Like they do not give us the full story of Jesus. They just don't. There are so many gaps in the life and ministry of Jesus. But what Matthew 9:35 says is that after he cast these demons out, Jesus went throughout all the cities and all the villages. He's teaching in their synagogues. He's proclaiming the gospel, which means preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and he's healing every disease and every affliction in all the cities and all the villages. And so, don't just read verse 35 and not notice that every affliction and every disease in all the cities and all the villages. So we just did 10. That could be hundreds, thousands. It could be tens of thousands. How big were the cities? I don't know. It doesn't tell us. But it was a lot, and we just get none of that context. And that's haunting and really exciting. Okay, 36. "And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest.'" And this is kind of a wild thing for Jesus to say. Jesus not only heals, but he goes through the cities and he's teaching and preaching, right? That's an important point. He's teaching and preaching. And the reason that he's teaching and preaching is because, yes, he could go through all the cities and villages and he could heal every affliction and every disease. And he could look at the crowds and he could feel bad for them because they were, like it says, they were helpless and harassed like sheep without a shepherd. And maybe Christ could have healed and taught and preached to and helped every single one of them. But instead what he decides to do is that he needs to teach and preach. And he needs to tell his disciples that they need to pray for more laborers. So he's looking at this helpless and harassed crowd of sheep without a shepherd. And what he thinks is we need more people. We need more people to come and help. He couldn't do the work by himself, or decided to not, and to have people come alongside him. He tells them to pray that the Father would provide many laborers. And that is like this passage, just so you know, is really important for me because it dictates so much of what I do. It dictates so much of what Pastor Jeff does on a Sunday morning, right? When we come and we teach and we preach, the point of that teaching and preaching is not just so that, like tonight, you could be kind of bored and listen to me talk for 50 minutes and teach on Matthew 9, because I can tell you guys are kind of bored and that's okay. But, like, the point is not just so that you could sit and listen, right? The point is that hopefully, even if you just learned a tiny little bit tonight, you're a little more equipped tomorrow. You're a little bit more trained tomorrow. And you're a little bit more ready tomorrow to be these laborers. Because what Christ does is he looks at this crowd and like he feels like sorrow because they're helpless and harassed and they don't have a shepherd. And he knows, okay, I have these people and I can count on them. And if I have them and can count on them, I know that I can take these people and I can send them out. And then they can find like people that they can count on. And they can train and teach and preach and equip those people. And then they can send those people out, right? And so this is like what we do with discipleship, right? This is why I had Devin and Devin come on stage with the people who are discipling them, and who they're discipling is because I wanted them to be able to see, I wanted the church to see that like one relationship between two people can then like multiply into way, way more than that, right? And so it just starts with Jesus and his close disciples, and he sends them out and he says we need to pray for them. And this is really important for me because, again, this is what I'm doing right now. My hope is that when we go to the Navajo Nation in June, that we'll be able to do that. And in a couple of years, when we go on an international mission trip, we'll be able to do that. But the hope is also that like tomorrow when you go to school, you'll be equipped and trained and more ready to be able to talk about the gospel with somebody if they're willing to listen. Or with your neighbor. Because, like, to be honest, you don't have to just talk to other teenagers. But if you're taking your trash out and you're, you know, the old dude that lives next door is also taking his trash out, you can just go ahead and, like, share the gospel with them. Right? And that's the hope, is that you right now, like, can be the laborer that Christ is looking for, to be the shepherd that helps lead the sheep, right? Because there's nothing different between these people who are helpless and harassed than there is for anybody that doesn't know the Lord. They are helpless and harassed sheep without a shepherd. And so that's what Christ is trying to teach us, is that right now, the reason that we do small group, and the reason that we do youth group, and the reason that we go on mission trips, and like the reason that the skippers are inside doing ESL, teaching people who don't know how to speak English by reading Bible verses. Like, the whole purpose of all of it is to create laborers who would then go do the work of Christ. And so the point, the reason that like you need to read Matthew 8 and 9 together is not just to see like Christ and like who he is personality-wise, but to see that we just watched like 10 miracles. We're just told about countless more. There's no way to put a number on it. He did all of those things. He's powerful over all of those things, over sin, over storms, over everything else that I said, sickness, disease, over outcasts. He brings grace, all these things, right? But the point is that he does all those things, and he actually still just chose you to be his laborer. He chose us to go and do that work. And I just think that that's a really high call. And I don't think that it's one like to not be taken seriously. And so when we sit, and I know that it feels like Matthew 9 is just like Matthew 8, so maybe you just heard the lesson 2 weeks in a row, and so maybe you're a little bored, but like the call at the end of this one is different than it was last time. And I'm telling you that you are the laborers, that you're supposed to be the hands and feet. You're supposed to be the one that now goes out and gets to share this story and this message, gets to look at what we're supposed to be from the Great Sermon and live that out actively. Sermons in action, and it doesn't mean that probably like Josie's going to go up and like touch people on the eyes and cure their blindness. Probably not. That'd be awesome, but probably not. And it would actually probably be problematic too, but probably not going to happen. But Josie can go to school, and we've seen, like, just to point you guys out specifically, Josie and Maya, like, they go to school and they come every week with guests. Thanks for being here, Uriah. They bring people to youth group. They are laboring, right? And they're not the only ones. You guys do this too, and I know so many of you invite people, and they might not come, and that's okay. That's still laboring, and you're still supposed to do it. And so that's the job. That's the call at the end of Matthew 9, right? Just like Jesus called Matthew to rise and follow me, now he's telling us, you're the person who's been prayed for to be the laborer. And now you're supposed to go do that and pray for the next people to come and labor beside him as well. I'm going to pray. There are the sheets for serving in ministries are over here by James again. We'll lay them out. There are pins. If you didn't get to do that, go sign up to serve on Sunday mornings. Read chapter 10. Read chapter 10, please, one time. Even if you read like verses 1 through 8 on Monday and 9 through 20 on Tuesday, and by the time you get to Friday, you're just reading 38 through 42, just read Matthew 10 and come knowing a little bit about Matthew 10 so that as I'm going through it really fast and not being able to do every detail, you don't look like you're so completely lost that maybe we've never talked about Matthew before, like you look like you are tonight. Let's pray, hang out. We have like half an hour to play games and just spend time together. So let's pray.